Introduction. Perhaps anyone sufficiently qualified can sit down and write a book dealing with any aspect of human knowledge and maintain that it states categorically the truth insofar as it is known at the time at which he writes. That can be done where objective understanding is concerned. But here, objective understanding is not the aim in view. That is the reason why the great masters never methodically taught it. That is the reason why they invariably sought to maneuver their disciples into turning round in the right direction, so that they might one day apprehend the truth for themselves and subjectively. That truth is always present and is always exactly where we are. Occasionally, however, particularly when they were questioned by high officials of the state, they offered objective knowledge. And that is of incalculable value to us, for we have no living masters at hand to maneuver us into turning round in the right direction, so that we have no alternative but to find out how to do that ourselves. And that can only be done when we have acquired a high degree of dualistic understanding. Such understanding, however, is not an end, but a beginning only, or if you like, it is the terminus from which the train sets forth that leads directly to our destination. For henceforth we may be said to run on rails, in the sense that the road home from objectivity to subjectivity is straight and direct, if it can be followed. This is the chemin of which Shen Hui speaks so often, the way which, once obtained, leads directly to the goal. Therefore, in this little book, we continue the journey during which the truth can never be written. The truth that can never be written is gradually approached by intuition rendered dualistically. As one closes in on that truth, that which has been described vaguely is as one closes in on that truth, that which has been described vaguely is subsequently described more accurately and more fully, and that which was imperfectly comprehended is corrected by that which has later been understood. As one closes in on that truth, that which has been described vaguely is subsequently described more accurately and more fully, and that which was imperfectly comprehended is corrected by that which has later been understood. Only the awakened can say definitely whatever it may be possible to say without error. The methods of the masters are illustrated by the saying, "To acquire understanding at the hands of others is to close the gates of self-enlightenment." Nothing could be more clearly or tersely expressed, and the explanation, of course, is that the understanding thus acquired is necessarily objective understanding. In fact, my understanding is valueless to you, quite necessarily so, even it be the correct understanding. Perhaps that is not clear, but it is a fact. In objective science, my understanding, if it were correct, would be perfectly valid for you, and you could take it from me if it were adequately expressed. But this understanding is not of that kind, and it cannot be transferred or transmitted. It can only be pointed at, and you have to find your own way to it yourself. Phenomenally, dualistically, you can be led to within sight of it, but only you yourself can see it. Even that is metaphorical, for the truth can never be seen, for seeing is objective. That too is looking in the wrong direction. And even when you look in the right direction, you will see nothing. That is void, for looking itself is objective and must be abandoned. Discouraging? Not really. After all, if it were easy, should we not all be Buddhas? I have expressed my view that since we have no fully awakened masters available to maneuver us into the correct orientation, we must proceed via objective understanding. Alas, we have no living masters available in the West at present, as far as I am aware, but we have the great awakened masters of the past whose words have been preserved, and we have the sutras, in particular the supreme Prajnaparamita Sutras. Alas, they are not easy. Alas, the translations, for which, nevertheless, we should be humbly grateful, are not quite satisfactory. And alas, we do not study them as we might. My view, for anything that it may be worth, is that to all intents and purposes, we have nothing else that matters. It is our misfortune that Chinese pictograms are devoid of grammar and syntax, that most words have many meanings, and that only someone who has fully understood the meaning of the text could really be qualified to translate it. Beyond that, many masters spoke in local dialect. Their very method tended towards slang or argot, the sense of which can only be guessed. And they no doubt used many common words in a special technical sense that is difficult to recover. All that is our burden, and we must bear it as best we may. We are not helped by our own regrettable tendencies to misuse our own words. Take, for instance, meditation. Exactly what the more qualified people who use it mean by it, I do not know. But we all know what the normal man means by it. St. John of the Cross, an enlightened Christian whose understanding is in perfect conformity with that of the Oriental masters, defines it clearly. He says, meditation, which is discursive mental activity by means of images, forms, and figures that are produced imaginatively. And he goes on to say that it is the first thing to be got rid of. The great masters said exactly the same. In fact, that may be said to be the focal point of their teaching, and, even if they had not said it, anyone who understands what they require of us must rapidly see it for himself. Yet, presumably because it is one of the meanings found in a Sanskrit dictionary for the word jnana, we are faced with practically nothing but that method of attaining enlightenment. Of course, anyone can take any word and declare that he uses it to mean the opposite, but really that does not seem to be a very good idea, nor one that is calculated to help the struggling pilgrim. The real meaning of jnana is well enough known, though no single word covers it in our languages. Of these, awareness is the nearest, implying a vivid state of consciousness free of all abiding or mentation of any kind. Footnote: the Lama Anagarika Govinda defines it variously as intuitive vision, inner awareness, spiritual awareness, without in any way comparing a definition with his. The sense in which I use it in this book is just non-objective awareness. As substitutes for meditation, contemplation and concentration are equally unhappy. Anyone who understands will immediately see why this must be so. Alas, there are many other such words, not least the unfortunate Zen. One may have the highest possible regard for the Japanese development of Chan, But Zen is that and nothing else whatever. Moreover, Chan is not dead, did not die when the doctrine was carried over to Japan. That peace, if propaganda, is no longer tenable now that we know of the great Shan masters, including Han Shan, who restored the monasteries, down to the grand old master, ancestor as they call him, Su Yun, who died last year at the age of 119. They preserved in far greater purity the teaching and methods of the Tang masters, and when we turn to them, we find in them a revelation, and it is surely as inaccurate as it is absurd to apply to them and their teaching the Japanese term Zen, which represents a tradition considerably different. Whatever propaganda and commerce may wish, serious students and scholars should use words in their proper sense. As for terms such as self-nature, that has rarely, if ever, anything to do with what we think of as self, for it indicates nothing personal, but subjective mind in the non-dual sense of subjectivity. The words mind, one mind, no mind, etc. rarely have the objective meaning we normally give them. And just as Wu Nian does not mean just no thought, Wu Wei does not imply inaction, but rather spontaneity. So Qi does not mean knowledge, and prajna does not always or even perhaps often mean what we think of as wisdom. If this is borne in mind, the true sense of the words of the awakened masters will rapidly become clearer. And if we reread them every 6 months or so, we will reap an even richer harvest of understanding, until finally we too will have fully and perfectly understood. Part 1. The Crossroads. Why are you unhappy? Because 99.9% of everything you think and of everything you do is for yourself, and there isn't one. 1. The Harlequinade. Perhaps our most serious handicap is that we start on the wrong foot. In the end, this is likely to be fatal, and I fear generally is. We have a basic conditioning, probably in some form of Christian religion, of which little remains today but its ethical content, or in one of the modern psychologies, that of Freud, Adler, or Jung, or in some scientific discipline, all of which are fundamentally and implacably dualist. Then the urge manifests, and we start reading. Every time we happen on a statement or a sentiment that fits in with our conditioned notions, we adopt it. perhaps with enthusiasm, at the same time ignoring, as though they did not exist, the statements or sentiments which either we did not like or did not understand. And every time we reread the Masters or the Sutras, we seize upon further chosen morsels, as our own jigsaw puzzle builds up within us, until we have a personal patchwork that corresponds with nothing on earth that could matter in the least. Not in 1,000,000,000 kalpas could such a process produce the essential understanding that the urge is obliging us to seek. We are required to do exactly the opposite of all that. We are required to lay down absolutely everything that is ours and which is known as ignorance, even though we regard it as knowledge. It is like stripping off clothes that have become personal, then naked, but in a nakedness that does not recognize itself as such. We should go to the Masters, who will clothe us in the garments of the knowledge or understanding that we really need. It is their jigsaw we must complete, not ours, for their doctrine, what they have to reveal to us, is one whole and indivisible, and the statements and sentiments that we do not at once understand, rather than those that we think we do, are the ones that matter. One by one, as we reread, and finally all at once, their meaning will become manifest, and we shall at last understand what the Masters have to tell us. Then and only then can we acquire their understanding, which is the fulfillment of the urge. As busy little bees, gathering honey here and there and adding it to their stock in their hive, we are wasting our time, and worse, for we are building up that very persona whose illusory existence stands between our phenomenal selves and the truth of what we are, and which is what the urge in us is seeking. That laying down of everything that is ours has always been insisted upon by the Masters, but we affect to ignore it, precisely because that very notion of self, which is the center of what we have to lay down, seeks to take charge of the operation, and generally succeeds in doing so, thereby frustrating from the start any hope of fulfilling the urge. Is there any wonder that we so rarely get anywhere at all? It is interesting to note that in the recently discovered collection of sayings of Jesus, there is one in which he formally adjured his disciples to divest themselves of all their garments. It is understandable that such a statement should have been omitted by those later compilers who had no idea what such a requirement could mean. But to us, it should be a commonplace. As far back as Chuang Tse, we find the story of the old monk who, in despair of knowing enlightenment before he died, went to see Lao Tse. On arrival, Lao Tse came out to meet him, welcomed him, but told him to leave his followers and his baggage outside the gate, for otherwise he would not be admitted. The old man had no followers and no baggage, but he understood, went in, and found his fulfillment. Two, ask the awakened. Since Bodhidharma, the recurrent menace that has overshadowed the supreme vehicle has been man's infatuation with himself. Whenever the succession of great masters weakened in power or in quality, the self-flattering, mirror-polishing doctrine re-emerged. Hui Neng and Shen Hui rescued the doctrine, but today it needs saving again, for, in the West at least, we are nearly all busy polishing our mirrors, or perfecting the hansom cab, as I have termed it, instead of understanding that neither the polisher nor the mirror, perfecter nor cab, has ever or could ever exist. What we need is another Bodhidharma, firm as a rock, fierce as a tiger, merciless in his grandmotherly kindness, and not afraid to tell emperors of China that they are talking through their hats. And if we cannot hope for a Bodhidharma, then at least we need desperately a Huineng. Otherwise, though Buddhism may survive, the supreme vehicle will surely be lost. Footnote: Hubert Benoit describes Bodhidharma as an awakener, someone who comes with kindness but also with implacable firmness, to rouse us from the dream in which we are living. And only the supreme vehicle ultimately matters, for self-exalting Buddhism is pseudo-Buddhism, for it is a contradiction in terms. A soothing syrup or a drug. Only the supreme vehicle carries the full and final message of the Tathagata. As long as we do not perceive the fatuity of a phenomenon telling itself how marvelous it is, we will never come to the knowledge of that which we are when we have understood that, as phenomena, we are not. Three, the crossroads of time and space. The present has no extension but intensity. Lama Anagarika Govinda. The present has no duration. Therefore, it does not exist in the lineal dimension of time. It is not horizontal. It has only a point of contact with seriality. The extension of the present is in another dimension to that of time. It is therefore at right angles to time. The direction of measurement of this essentially timeless dimension is within. That is the reason of the importance instinctively given to momentanete. Momentanete, to presence in the present, to spontaneity, and the reason of the creation of expressions such as the eternal present. The so-called present is our link with the dimension that includes the three we already know and use. It is the point at which time cuts across space. and as a concept, it is spatial rather than temporal. The present is not a fleeting moment, it is the only eternity. In time lies samsara, in the present lies nirvana. Time is the measurement of objectivity. The present is the presence of subjectivity, in which everything potentially is, and from which, in time, everything is apparently projected. The assumed so-called present is our point of contact with body-mind, BODHI. It is the invisible portal through which intuition reaches us from the interior of ourselves, from that universal and limitless interior, spatially thought of, which is all we ever were or ever will be, and which is out of time. It is the sole line of communication between our enveloping totality and our apparent existence as separate individual creatures. Between our universality and our illusory particularity, between the noumenality, and the phenomenality of all sentient beings. The present alone in our experience is what is, and phenomenally it is not. For it is only an imaginary division between past and future, like the equator between the northern and southern hemispheres. It is like a fictional line of latitude that is a symbol rather than an existence, and yet represents a vital transmission from one sphere to another, from north to south, from past to future, neither of which has any reality in itself, but each of which is a concept that artificially divides a continuity in space or in time. The present alone represents that which we are in, an apparent world in which we are not. The present alone represents that which we are, in an apparent world in which we are not, since therein we are appearances, phenomena only. We ourselves neither exist nor do we not exist. Neither existing samsarically nor not existing nirvanically, we are nothing in any way in which we can know ourselves, but as the present. Note: the present is the dimension I have indicated by the image of vertical, being or seeing. which is an essential discrimination for comprehending in what manner we, sentient beings, can be understood to be. It is also the dimension in which occurs whatever actuality there may be in the expression living in Zen, and in when I am hungry, I eat, when I am weary, I sleep, in the manner in which the awakened masters themselves did that. Four, he who gets slapped. When I was a child, I was taken to the circus. There I saw a long series of entrancing performances that caused men and animals to execute every kind of astonishing and unexpected maneuver. And throughout, but particularly when the scenario and its appurtenances were being changed, there appeared a grotesque personage, vaguely resembling a human being, who interfered with everything but effected nothing. He fell over the carpets, bumped himself against every object, was slapped and kicked, and then took all the applause as though he were responsible for everything. We thought him very funny and laughed at him like anything. Now that I am no longer a child, he seems to me to be a perfect image of the I concept, whose function is apparently his, and whose performance corresponds in all respects with that of the clown in the circus, which is our life. In all respects but one, we laughed at the clown in the circus, but we take seriously the clown in the circus of life, although the one is as ineffectual as the other. We even believe that he is responsible for the performance, whereas as children we could see that he was responsible for nothing that happened, that his will was totally ignored by the circumstances to which he was subjected, and that in every event he was an unnecessary nuisance. In one respect, however, our attitude is unchanged. In both the circuses we love and the clown dearly. In both the circuses, we love the clown dearly and consider him more important than anything else in the show. 5. That I am. When I have looked at a jug, I have supposed that I subject was looking at jug object. But I subject is itself an object. And one object cannot be the subject of another object. Both I supposed subject and the jug are objects of I subject. That is apparent transcendence of subject object. But only when we realize that, in split mind, I, the letter I as subject, must always be itself an object, while it also has its own supposed object. Do we understand that this constitutes an infinite regression, and that final transcendence is the understanding that I am not subject? For, since in reality there are no objects, there cannot be a subject. No objects and no subject constitute impersonality, the resultant of the negation of each member of every pair of opposites. Or no entity. Only whole mind can know this, and this is that I am. 6. Enlightenment by non-action. All so-called volition is a manifestation of the I concept. Who seeks enlightenment? As long as it is sought under the compulsion of the I concept, how could it possibly be realized? On the other hand, as soon as the I concept disappears, it is seen to be there all the time. By the I concept, but the I concept only wants pseudo-enlightenment, by which it can pose as a sage. Realization involving its own liquidation does not appear at all desirable, and it will place every possible obstacle in the way. This is the reason why any and every method, discipline, etc., subject to the I concept, must be a path leading away from home. Since all action that is not non-action, or as we see it, spontaneous, is performed under the compulsion of the I concept. For there is no other actor. That is no real actor at all. Enlightenment or satori can only be the consequence of non-action. Service. Gratifying the I concept can never render a service. That, no doubt, is why the masters never did it. For rendering service was their sole use of living. Yet it is the sole method of what we regard as rendering service. Seven. Silence 1. When the Maharshi tells us that silence is a more potent medium than speech, we tend to be incredulous, for to us silence is merely the negation of noise. When he states that stillness is the sole requisite for the realization of the self as God, we know that he refers to stillness of the mind. So silence also means silence from thoughts. or as we might prefer to say, absence of cerebration. The negation of noise as an aid to thought could never be in question, for thought must be a barrier to spiritual understanding. The potency of silence, of which he sometimes speaks, as indeed do others, is to be sought in the interval between thoughts, of infinitesimal duration to split mind, but without, or of infinite duration in itself, since it is intemporal. To him who experiences it, it might have any conceivable duration, though to an observer it can have none. In itself, it is never a momentary thing, for it is the permanent background of what we experience as time. The reality rather than the background, and in a feeble image, the screen onto which the ever-moving pictures of conceptual life are projected. Its incalculable potency then becomes apparent, for it is no other than whole mind.